Katerina Jakob watched the German soldiers flee, streaming from the east, that's what she was seeing. Allied bombers flew above them, she thought they all might die, and then soon there was the silence of all the SS men. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katerina Jakob saw red flags flapping in the breeze above the Russian tanks, and she fell upon her knees. And so many different voices in so many different tongues sang the most beautiful song that could ever have been sung. In German, Lithuanian, in Polish and in Dutch, a myriad of melodies as never had been such. In Russian and in Yiddish, Italian and French, emerging from the forests beneath the trench. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht.
Hello and welcome to Revolutionary Socialist Review for February 4, 2021. Hard to believe. My God. We're already into the, what is this, the 3rd decade of the 21st, of the 21st century. It's astounding to me. I guess it shows how old I am too. Anyway, let me introduce ourselves. First of all, my name is Chris Driscoll, and along with me is Rainer Shea. We are the duo that brings you the Revolutionary Socialist Review, basically a review of major happenings in the socialist working class and of news that affects us, ideas, major articles that are published, including occasionally some by me, and much more often a whole slew of them by Rainer, who is prolific as a Marxist-Leninist journalist and writer. So, with that, Rainer Shea, how are you?
Oh, hello. This is something like a couple weeks into the Biden administration, and already we're seeing certain trends develop. I'm going to be talking about the Biden administration's policies on Somalia and how this reflects the strategy the new Secretary of State Antony Blinken has laid out for creating what's essentially slimmed down U.S. exceptionalism, where the war machine is going to intensify its bombings and drone strikes in certain areas, will drawing down troops in other areas and presenting this as proof that Biden is ending the endless wars. And it's all so much disingenuousness and deception and diversion, and we need to expose it.
Yeah, definitely. So we will be looking forward to that. That'll be a little bit later. But actually, the first thing we talk about here will kind of set the stage for that. Presidents Xi of China and Putin of the Russian Federation make the case for a win-win versus zero sum. And the win-win, of course, is the strategy, the proposals being brought by Presidents Xi and Putin, and the zero sum, you lose, the capitalist class wins, is brought to you by the Western capitalist class, led by the American empire. This article is by Pepe Escobar. Pepe, I've mentioned him occasionally in the past. He does some really good stuff. He's originally from Brazil, but he's all over the world. God only knows who he is, where he is right now. He doesn't actually say in this article, but it is this comes to us via thegreenvillepost.com. However, it was first posted in Asia Times, which I think is Pepe's major outlet there, the Asia Times. Pretty good online newspaper. Anyway, what he's talking about, actually, I've already talked about this last week, and that is the Davos Economic Forum. And Davos is in Switzerland, I believe. It's a city in Switzerland. And it happens once a year, and all the big movers and shakers from industry, from bourgeois politics, from the major imperial states, and bourgeois intellectuals, people who are hired to do the thinking for the capitalists. Those three categories mostly, plus slews of journalists. They get together on this Davos Economic Forum once a year. And some pretty heavy hitters give speeches there, give talks, or whatever you want to call it, kind of like TED Talks, I guess, if people have ever seen the TED Talks. And they're aimed at their audience, which are the capitalists and the toadies who hang on to the capitalists, who are indebted to and do the work of, do the bidding of the capitalists. And it's just a one of the major forums, there are others, that allows these capitalists to get together with the people who do their thinking for them, and with the politicians who execute that thinking for them. Anyway, as I mentioned last week, President Xi's speech to Davos and President Putin's speech to Davos, I thought they were really, really important. Pepe Escobar goes even farther. He basically, he says some stuff here that I was astounded by. He says, predictably, the two really crucial events at Davos received minimal or non-existent coverage across the wobbly West. I like that, the wobbly West. You let that absorb, the wobbly West. The speech is by President Xi and President Putin. Geez, we've got a really low flying jet above us. It's must be a military jet doing exercises over the valley. Predictably, the two really crucial, well, that's what I already just said. He says, we have already highlighted Xi's essentials. Aside from arguing a powerful case for multilateralism as the only possible roadmap to deal with global challenges, Xi stressed nothing substantial may be achieved if the inequality gap between North and South is not reduced. In the best in-depth analysis of Putin's extraordinary speech, hands down, was provided by Rostislav Ishenko, whom I had the pleasure to meet in Moscow in 2018. I meaning Pepe Escobar. Ishenko stresses how, in terms of scale and impact on historical processes, this is steeper than the battles of Stalingrad and Kursk combined. The speech, he adds, was totally unexpected, as much as Putin's stunning intervention at the Munich Security Conference in 2007, the crushing defeat imposed on Georgia in 2008, and the return of Crimea in 2014. Wow. That means this is really, really important. And I have to kind of agree now that I've had some time to absorb what these guys have really said. Putin went into the terrible situation the whole world went through in the 1930s with the Great Depression, and the inability and unwillingness to find substantive solutions to problems like this in the 20th century led to the World War II catastrophe. And that was juxtaposed with a common sense warning: the necessity of preventing the takeover of global policy by big tech, something, Rainer, that you have been emphasizing recently, which are de facto competing with states. He's Pepe. Putin is saying these big tech companies are competing with established states around the world. Xi and Putin's speeches were de facto complementary, emphasizing sustainable win-win economic development for all actors, especially across the global South, coupled with the necessity of a new socio-political contract in international relations. Well, of course, this goes on, and you can get it. You can just look for it at the Greenville Post, for example. Look for Pepe Escobar. Xi and Putin make the case for win-win versus zero sum. It was published on February 2nd, which is 2 days ago by the time you guys listen to this. And you can go, I urge you to go look and read the entire article. But essentially, he's making the case that Xi and Putin in this, they're throwing down the gauntlet to the imperial West to let them know there's another sheriff in town, to let them know there's another game in town. And this game is going to take the side of the world working class. This is going to take the side of oppressed nations around the world, especially in the global South. It puts it all together. Pepe Escobar goes into the components of this, like the Belt and Road Initiative, for example. The alliance, the unstated, the the alliance with no treaty between Russia and China, and how important they are as leadership for this new multipolar world to stand up against the decaying evil empire, the American empire. So, Rainer, what are your thoughts?
Man, this opens up so many realities that we're not really exposed to as residents of the core imperialist countries so much, because everything that the media feeds us about Russia and China is designed to paint these countries as evil, obviously, and also to make it seem like the world is in every way headed towards necropolitics and breakdown and a bleakness that perfectly reflects the bleak world which imperialist neoliberalism is creating. I feel like as Americans, I don't consider America a nation really, but as Americans, we're isolated in this Potemkin nation that's perpetually trying to convince us that Washington and NATO are the world's only hopes, and that neoliberalism is the best system possible. And they do this with censorship of anti-imperialist voices. They do this with perpetual demonizations of the Russian and Chinese governments. They do this by stoking paranoia about the Belt and Road Initiative, portraying it as horribly neo-colonial. It's interesting how these kinds of the kind of ideological dynamics that have emerged from this propaganda bombardment. It seems like the American patriots tend to view the United States as superior to Russia and China's global foreign policy designs and policies. Will the leftists, the anti-communist leftists, tend to view China and the United States as morally equivalent. Both of these positions reinforce the nihilistic, defeatist attitude that the U.S. ruling class hegemony seeks to instill within the masses. And it's information like what you just mentioned that can shake people out of this enforced sense of apathy, this enforced sense of bleakness, this feeling that since there's no that since the geopolitical rivals are all moral equivalents, there's no point in fighting the imperialist propaganda, in challenging the ideological hegemony that sustains this internal tyranny of U.S. imperialism.
Right, exactly. Well put. Okay, moving right along, because you said you want to move right along, so that's what we're going to do tonight, and hopefully that suits everyone else's purposes as well. Topic number 2. This basically comes from the Party of Socialism and Liberation, a statement that they have put out. Biden in office, capitalists in power. You just mentioned, Rainer, some of this just in our introduction here. But I just want to read you a few of the paragraphs from this statement. I think it says it pretty well. Others have said it as well. So this is certainly not a unique perspective to the PSL, the Party of Socialism and Liberation. I'd say it's pretty ubiquitous among all Marxist-Leninists. this outlook. But they say today, just as has happened every 4 years since 1789, an avowed defender of the wealth and power of the ruling elite has been sworn into office as president of the United States. While a great many people are understandably relieved that Donald Trump is leaving the White House, Joe Biden's inauguration on its own will do nothing to remedy the urgent crisis facing the working class, and will do nothing to rein in the destructive role of the U.S. war machine abroad. Despite, I personally would point out, despite the fact that Biden is now the commander in chief of the U.S. military. In other words, he is the dictator over the military. What he says goes. He can do practically anything he wants to if he can get the money for it. And Congress has been traditionally slavish in giving the president whatever money they ask for in that regard. Back to the statement. Having spent almost his entire life as a member of the political elite, Biden has accumulated a clear track record as a reactionary politician at the service of Wall Street and the Pentagon. In his acceptance speech, Biden emphasized the need for national unity, reconciliation, and bipartisanship. With the Republican Party embroiled in the turmoil following the January 6th attack on the Capitol, some elements may be inclined to take up Biden on his offer of cooperation. And they would do so knowing full well that historically, bipartisanship has always meant that liberals adapt themselves to the program of the far right, not the other way around. The Democratic Party controls the presidency and both houses of Congress. The only reason that they would seek bipartisanship at this moment is that they prefer the program of the right wing to the program of the left wing. Couldn't have said it better myself. But politics is dynamic, and the intervention of the masses of people can make the difference. The struggle of the working class has the power to force even the most reactionary politician to offer concessions. Biden knows this, and there are indicators that some of his first acts in office may be designed to head off opposition from the left. For this struggle to be effective, it must be independent of the Democratic Party and develop its own socialist leadership. Under Biden, it will become ever clearer that the dire problems facing the world are rooted in the capitalist system itself, not the individual politician who holds office. It will become ever clearer that revolution and the complete reorganization of society is the only way out of the multiple intensifying crises of capitalism. The Party for Socialism and Liberation will redouble its efforts towards this end. Well, don't agree with everything that they say here. I think they're a little bit too, as they typically are. I've had words with Brian Becker, one of the founders of the PSL, about this on many occasions, but they do tend to be overly, let's say, accommodating to the liberal wing of the capitalist class and its toady politicians, and I see some of that in this statement. But overall, they're giving you exactly the clear route forward, which is don't rely on Biden. I'd also disagree with the idea that they state here that Biden or that the most right-wing politician can be pushed into concessions. Well, I would claim that given the a crisis of the falling rate of profit in capitalism over the last 40 years, 40 to 50 years, that they can no longer give concessions while retaining their, saving their crumbling, decrepit system. It's essential for them that their crumbling, decrepit system give up no more that will dig into already low profits. That's their problem. But in any case, it is true that we should push towards this, towards reforms, towards concessions, demand them, because the working class looks at that, and the working class sees that's reasonable. Those communists are, they're demanding reasonable things. They're suggesting that we demand reasonable solutions to our problems. What's with this government and this state that are not accommodating, that are not conceding on these points? So anyway, what are your thoughts, Rainer?
Yes, I also noticed some tendencies within the language of this statement from the PSL that reflects how the PSL has been approaching the Democratic Party in these last couple of years in particular. We know how the PSL last year, they considered conditionally supporting Sanders should he have won. If I've got that right, that's the impression that I got.
I would just say that they not that they
correct me if I'm wrong.
I would just say that they conditionally supported Sanders in his.
Oh,
I'd eliminate all those qualifiers. Other than that, they said that they're giving him critical support, and that's what critical support means. So it wasn't considering doing that. They did it. And so did Workers' World Party. So too did Workers' World Party, out of which the PSL came like 20 years ago or so, in a split.
There are tendencies towards this kind of thing within many communist parties within the U.S. The Communist Party USA has infamously had a habit of lending support to the Democratic nominees, and the Revolutionary Communist Party outright endorsed Biden. And I'm looking at these trends, and I'm wondering why is there this tendency to concede to the Democratic Party, whether this involves the election season or post-election rhetoric like what we just saw. I mean, I'm not trying to vilify the PSL. I think the PSL has done potentially the most work among any other modern communist party in the U.S., and they're really being proactive about what they're doing, and they have a good line on China. But there's also this contradiction within these general Marxist institutions in this country of lending, of conceding in certain ways to the liberal establishment. And I think this has to do with a kind of reaction among their leadership to the nature of our conditions. This is the core of global imperialism, and petty bourgeois reformism is the rule that leftists in this country have to they almost are forced to participate in it in order to gain significant clout. You're an election boycott advocate, and you you try to stay outside of electoral politics entirely, but the PSL has made the strategic choice to run candidates, and there's all these messy contradictions that are present when you're trying to build a Marxist movement in the United States. So you come up against things like this, and at certain points you have to wonder what is the best way to phrase this so that I don't come off as alienating to the people who I'm trying to win over.
As sectarian.
And I guess for as long as the United States remains stable, we're going to be stuck in this kind of irritating paradigm when it comes to left-wing organizing in this country. At that point, it'll be after the country becomes destabilized that we'll be able to move towards an openly revolutionary point, like happened in the case of Cuba, Washington's next door neighbor, something like 50 or so years ago, where the contradictions of the system heightened to a point where there was an opening for the communists to wage a militant movement and actually unseat the existing state and replace it with a proletarian democracy.
Yeah, well, this conundrum you raise, it's certainly not unique to the PSL or to the Workers' World Party, which has the exact same thing. And it's long-standing. It's not something they just came up with right now. In fact, it is rooted in Georgy Dimitrov and Joseph Stalin's adoption of the Popular Front. This is the Popular Front. And the Popular Front was adopted by the Communist Party of America. I guess they called it back then. It's called the Communist Party USA now. It's the same organization, same politics. In the Communist Party, since the 1936 election, which was a crucial election, as it was the re-election of FDR, and it allowed for FDR to maneuver the United States into World War II. It has been a constant in almost all communist parties, most of whom, in one way or another, trace their roots back to the Communist Party of America in the 1930s. It has been a constant for almost all of those parties, with some exceptions. There are some Maoist organizations that broke away from the Popular Front as, wrongly applied in America. A Popular Front can work if it is an advantage to the working class. Like in China, for instance, China has a Popular Front government. Still to this day, they have a government that includes 8 political parties. And of those 8 political parties, I think like 6 of them are avowedly capitalist political parties. However, the Chinese Communist, the Communist Party of China, dominates overwhelmingly over all those others. So there was never, ever any threat that any of these other political parties would drag the Communist Party of China down into the gutter of this kind of class collaborationist politics that ends up subsuming the working class into the Democrat Party, into a capitalist political party. That's what has occurred. And there's nothing at all new about this. It has been going on since 1936. 1935 is when the Comintern, the Communist International, adopted this program of class collaboration. And it's been applied in different ways in different parts of the world. Some, especially in the third world, where an alliance with the comprador capitalists, the indigenous capitalists, is essential to defeating imperialism. Sometimes you can make a case for that, like the Sandinistas in 1979 in Nicaragua, for instance, had that kind of a popular front, and it led to a successful revolution, a revolutionary overthrow of the part of the indigenous capitalist class that was aligned with American imperialism. So in other words, it liberated Nicaragua from imperialism. So, but as you say, we need to walk a fine line here, walk the tightrope, so to speak, between being sectarian and offensive. This does not mean that we do not look towards these brother and sister political organizations like the PSL, like even the Communist Party, or even the DSA, for that matter, the Social Democrats, who have the same exact approach as well, of subsuming themselves into the Democrat Party. We want to be open to the idea that we can work with all these other forces around common interests, while at the same time retaining our right to be independent politically and to be independent political thinkers when it comes to retaining authentic Marxism-Leninism. And I'll guarantee you can never, ever find a case where Lenin agreed with the idea of popular front. Lenin always urged the idea of a united front. That is, a front between workers' organizations, not between workers' organizations and capitalist organizations. So with that, moving right along, I guess it's good that tonight we only have 6 points, because we're already absorbing quite a lot of time with just these first couple of points. But let's see. And anyway, also to conclude on the PSL statement, it was a very good statement, and people should go to the PSL website, which is, I believe it's called pslweb.org, and find this statement. Is prominently placed on that website, and take a look there. Topic number 3, the U.S. military's plans to bring the war home. This is something, Rainer, that you've been speaking about quite a bit over the last couple of years, really, especially over the last year that I can recall. I'm not great at remembering exact timings like that, but yeah, take it away.
I've written an article that's like over 4,000 words long, and that extensively quotes military reports from over the last 20 years or so. And it explains how the U.S. military and its adjacent think tanks aim to suppress a class revolt when it inevitably appears within the United States in the coming several decades. And by a class revolt, I mean more than a mass protest movement. I mean more than riots. I mean an attempt at a people's war, like the one that resulted in a socialist revolution so close to the United States over in Cuba. The U.S. empire fears that this is an eventuality. It fears that that as a result of the perpetuation of neoliberalism, in reaction to what you described about how there's been a falling rate of profit and how the ruling class has to perpetuate this austerity paradigm, eventually it's going to result in a people's war. And when the people's war appears, the military is going to have to be ready to crack down, more than crack down, actually domestically invade the United States and create a situation that it seems like it's going to somewhat resemble, in many ways resemble, what Israel has done to pacify Gaza's deeply impoverished population. A U.S. Army War College report from 2016 that I extensively quote in my article even outlines a plan for invading large cities like Los Angeles. Los Angeles is actually one of the many cities that the report mentions by name, and its list of places that the U.S. could invade in the coming decades. It describes how after the cities within the U.S. are invaded, the military will have to put these zones under occupation and potentially cut off internet and cell phone access to the local populations, and make it so that the local media within them will only put out official U.S. military propaganda. At the same time, the state will be carrying out mass surveillance through means of mobile devices and human intelligence assets and drones, and the U.S. military will be occupying these spaces indefinitely. Will the rich, they hope, can continue to enjoy a little tech utopias within what they call the smart cities. Already we're seeing the smart cities develop in the COVID-19 era. This is the vision of the future that the military hopes to bring about in the event that internal warfare and extensive natural disasters and far greater pandemics and future economic shocks destabilize the United States. The military hopes to put the destabilized zones under occupation and successfully fight off any potential guerrillas, so that the overall structure of the state can be fortified, so that the status quo can be maintained. Except, of course, this will be a situation decades from now where a lot of people in the U.S. will be a lot poorer even than they are now, and many of them will be living in freedomless military occupation zones.
Aha! Wow. Tour de force. Yeah, I read about half of your article this morning. That was all I got through. So I was dealing with a lot of other stuff, but I will be reading the rest of it, and I have to say it's an essential article for people to read, especially people in the left, people in the communist and socialist left, people in the major movements for social change, the anti-war movement, et cetera, and definitely really indicts the capitalist ruling class for what it is doing the American capitalist ruling class for what it is doing inside this country. You don't want to call it a nation. It does fit all the major criteria or the prerequisites for a nation. However, it is always extremely important to remember that it is a nation that is in fact an empire, and it has, as all empires do, it has cobbled together many oppressed nations within it. Ultimately, until we, as a nation, as a country, deal with sorting out that oppression and ensuring that all of these oppressed nations have the right to self-determination, and that they can decide themselves whether they want to continue in some future alliance or federation of a socialist federation in the United States and beyond, a global socialist federation, hopefully someday. But it has to be done voluntarily by them, determined democratically. But yeah, I was having a discussion today with a Canadian communist friend of mine, and we were talking about some recent demonstrations, and he was saying, well, at least they haven't droned us yet, although I keep expecting that to happen. And I said, yeah, I started telling him about this article you've written. And I said, yeah, I mean, it is absolutely true that these imperialists who've used these fascistic, brutal tactics of oppression against brown and black people of color, basically around the world, especially in the global South, that they're now bringing home those tactics to use on American people inside the United States of America. And I told him I won't be surprised, since the Canadian military and espionage regime is so closely aligned, actually probably more like controlled by the United States of America, by the capitalist ruling class in America. I won't be surprised if it starts happening there too. So yeah, definitely very important for us to learn as much as we can about it. And you deserve the credit, Rainer, for doing such a stupendous job of analysis as well as research in crafting this overarching look at this major problem that we face. So anything more on that?
One point from the article that I want to articulate is that given how Israel's settler colonial genocidal war against the Palestinians is itself a project of U.S. imperialism, the Israelification of the U.S. national security state that my article observes is yet another instance of the saying about how the empire's tyrannies abroad come home within the empire. And this is what we've been observing in these last 10 years or so, especially with the state's reaction to Occupy Wall Street, where there were these quasi-Israeli military police involved and that have been training U.S. police in this last decade.
Yeah, definitely the Zionist occupier state occupying Palestine, Greater Palestine. It's a state without land of its own. It has taken the land of the Palestinian people. But for the Americans, the American capitalist class, it is a test bed. It's a place where they can test out their warfare theories, their theories of police state, before bringing them to other parts of the world, and as we're seeing now, bringing them home to us. It's kind of like the husband that fucks around and brings the clap back home with him, you know. Pretty nasty shit. Okay. Next on the list, another one by Rainer Shea, the prolific Rainer Shea, 100 Seconds to Midnight, the dissonance and madness of our time.
In this last week or so, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists said that that the world is now 100 seconds to midnight, and they said this for the second year in a row, starting last January in 2020. And this followed several years where the doomsday clock was either at 3 minutes to midnight or 2 minutes to midnight. It seems like it's really been 2 minutes to midnight since Trump was elected, or I think it became that way in 2018. And in this last decade, the doomsday clock has been drifting towards this point of unprecedented direness that actually surpasses somehow the level of danger of nuclear annihilation that was present during the most dangerous moments of the Cold War. And I think this is too much for us to really comprehend the level of danger that we're in. So we assign numbers to it that can provide us a little bit of psychological comfort, at least insofar as we can attach these arbitrary, easily comprehensible numbers to it. I don't know how much the doomsday clock actually means, but the fact that these atomic scientists judge the current level of danger as worse than during the height of the Cold War says something about the moment that we've entered into in this last decade. It says something about just how gargantuan the situation is. It says something about the gravity of our situation, where the largest empire in the history of the world is rapidly losing its status, and in reaction, it's engaging in military buildup and military provocations against Russia, China, and Iran. Biden's team plans to continue this in certain ways by actually in many ways by militarizing the Arctic and somehow using climate change as an excuse to continue military buildup against Russia and China, and of course the status quo of Cold War escalations against Washington's rival is going to continue in these next few years. This is the status quo that the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has described as, what is it, the new abnormal. That's how they describe the current era that we've entered into. It seems like the cutoff year was 2014, when Washington installed a fascist regime in Ukraine that started a proxy war with Russia, and since then it's been nothing but escalations and paranoia on the part of Washington, and really huge steps towards replicating the worst of the risks that were present during the Cold War. There's also been a sabotage of arms treaties on the part of Donald Trump that's igniting a nuclear arms race more dangerous than during the Cold War. So, given all of these realities, what's the prevailing attitude towards this within the core of the empire? How do the American people view this? Well, the truth is, it's among the least significant things that we think about. The new nuclear arms race and geopolitical tensions are seemingly the last things on the mind of the average person. It's one of the last things within our political discourse. I mean, the greatest extent to which this enters into our discourse is with New York Times columns like the one put out this week by Nicholas Kristof, who assured people that according to a lot of experts, the likelihood of an actual war between the U.S. and China is exceedingly low. However, this criteria alone doesn't determine the level of danger. The reality is that we're in a long-term Cold War. We're in a long-term great power competition. And when you're in a long-term Cold War, there's going to be numerous risks that appear for an accident to happen. I don't believe the U.S. will intentionally ignite a war with China, but it's entirely possible that an accident will happen. And this is, I think, where the primary danger lies.
Yes, well put. Of course, I've dealt with this issue numerous times since this clock last year went to 100 seconds. And I have to say, I believe that the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists is an objective, a much more objective look at this than, for instance, Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times is. China is doing everything in its power, bending over backwards. So is Russia, to avoid this, because they know that this would be essentially the end of humanity. Were this to break out, once it breaks out, it's all over, probably. It's difficult to imagine containing such a thing before it destroys all of humanity and most of the higher level life on the face of the earth. It's really quite a dire thing. And job well done, Rainer, of pulling this all together, presenting it to the public. We should always point out that you can get the full article and read the whole thing, which I am going to do, I swear, at rainershade.com. And anything else on that before we move on?
No, I laid it all out.
You did lay it all out. Okay, next on our list, the rentier resurgence and takeover. Finance capitalism versus industrial capitalism. And this is by Michael Hudson, who I consider to be the premier Marxist economist in America today. He's very well known, gets around. You see him on Democracy Now!, for instance, on various shows like that. He's a pretty smart guy. And last year he put out a book called Cold War 2.0, The Geopolitical Economics of Finance Capital versus Industrial Capitalism. So look around, your favorite bookstore or whatever, your favorite online book establishment. I'm not going to name no names, but it's called Cold War 2.0, The Geopolitical Economics of Finance Capitalism versus Industrial Capitalism. And he brings up here in this book and also in this article, which is based on the first, I believe, 2 chapters of that book from last year. He brings up this enormous change that we've been seeing in capitalism in America and in much of the imperialist cosmopolitan countries, they call them, the imperialist countries, of which America is the hegemon, of the leader, the undisputed dictator to all the others. And that is that America is progressively moving towards a finance capitalism, rentier capitalism model, and away from an industrial capitalism model. Now, Marx, in his magnus opus, Capital Volumes 1, 2, and 3, dealt with the reality, with the existence of these 2 forms of capitalism. One being productive, it produces stuff, it produces things that people need, produces commodities, the way he put it, it's producing commodities. That is industrial capitalism. And finance capitalism, which has its roots in feudalism. And Hudson points out here, he says, Marx and many of his less radical contemporary reformers saw the historical role of industrial capitalism as being being too clear away the legacy of feudalism. The landlords, bankers, and monopolists extracting economic rent without producing real value. But that reform movement failed. Today, the finance, insurance, and real estate fire sector, it's called the fire sector, has regained control of government, creating neo-rentier economies. The aim of this post-industrial finance capital is the opposite of that of industrial capitalism as known in the 19th century economists. It seeks wealth primarily through the extraction of economic rent, not industrial capital formation. Tax favoritism for real estate, privatization of oil and mineral extraction, banking and infrastructure monopolies add to the cost of living and of doing business. Labor is being exploited increasingly by bank debt, student debt, credit card debt, while housing and other prices are inflated on credit, leaving less income to spend on goods and services as economies suffer debt deflation. And he goes on here. I want to just urge people to seek out this article. It's in, let's see, where the hell did I get this? Let me see a sec here. Let me move over here. It is just a second here. You can find this at michael-hudson.com. So it's like at the top of the list on Michael Hudson's personal website, michael-hudson.com. So you can find it there. And yeah, I mean, this is the reason that Marx thought of capitalism in his time as having been a progressive step forward for humanity, because capitalism, dominated by industrial capitalism, in other words, capitalism that creates valuable stuff, creates things that people need and use and absolutely have to have, um, that sector of the capitalist economy would eventually displace, remove rentier capitalism, finance capitalism, in other words. But the exact opposite has happened progressively more and more over the last century, especially since the onset of the age of imperialism, which is usually pegged at the year 1898. But it's an arbitrary thing. You could find examples of imperialism long, long before that, certainly colonialism, and long, long after that. But this, I think, is an important thing because it shows part of the degeneration, part of the reason that one of the reasons, I guess you'd say, that the American hegemony over the world, the American control of the world that became absolute after the end of World War II and continued on until the last 20 years or so, when it has become more and more threatened, until we arrive at today. We've talked about this earlier in the show, to the point where China and Russia actually, in the leadership, lead the global South in challenging that hegemony. And we think that they have a pretty good chance of success in that challenge. So, very important article. I have not yet gotten the book, Cold War 2.0, the geopolitical economics of finance capital versus industrial capitalism. But I believe, just from what I know so far, from reading this article, that it is a major change in the capitalist imperialist system, and something that all Marxists should grab hold of and read. Kudos to Michael Hudson on that one. Rainer, back to you.
You have brought up some things that truly fascinate me, because you speak to a trend within how capitalism has been evolving, where initially it was a force that was expanding economic growth and adding on to society, and that was the benefit of the rise of bourgeois society, and it's been how the system has been able to create a material base for mass support for the system, and how the system really has been able to gain perceived credibility. Like the narrative around capitalism is that it's the system that creates great pillars of civilization, that it's the system that can build, that can bring humanity into a grand new age. And at this point, we're at a stage where the system is really just eating itself. There's still some expansion and production and industrial growth in some areas, but so much of how our economy works, so much of how wealth is produced, is that it's this sad self-destructive situation where these poor and working class people are having so much of their money siphoned off to these opportunistic hedge fund managers, bankers, oligarchs. Now in the recent decades, it's increasingly been tech plutocrats who've capitalized off of surveillance capitalism, which of course does not produce material goods in the way that 19th century capitalism does. It's just people addicted to screens looking at ads that give revenue for the tech oligarchs. And these are the contradictions within the system that keep piling up, where there's this vast deficiency of industrial power. This ties in with the fact that over the last half century, so much of the U.S. economy has become deindustrialized. So much of this wealth has been outsourced to lower paying countries or replaced with means for producing wealth for the capitalists that don't involve producing more material goods, but rather engaging in petty theft against the working class on a mass scale.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well put. Good observations. It's incredible to me. You bring up the tech industry, and of course, as a journalist, I covered the tech industry, basically the software industry, some hardware as well. But other than the hardware that they produce, the actual computers, which is a very small part of the industry, the tech industry is a service industry. It's not a commodity producing industry. Software, for instance, what is software? It's a service. It's a set of instructions to your computer, and they sell this set of instructions. In other words, they're selling you information about what to do with your computer. They're selling you a service. There's no commodity in that. There's no tangible some ideas is what they sell. Well, those ideas are important, they're essential, but they shouldn't be dominating large parts of the world, which is what they do now. It's turning things upside down, and of course, it's all aimed, as you've pointed out several times in recent months. The tech industry is being used as an oppressor to the working class globally, and that's intentional. So yeah, anyway, I believe this is a really important milestone in the history of Marxist-Leninist theory, to tell you the truth, and I think we should really study it. So as I said, you can get this at the michael-hudson.com website. Just look up Michael, just do a online search for Michael Hudson. Really, it'll come up. Very important economists in the world today. Now, finally, our last topic of the night, topic number 6. When will the war paradigm come home? Paradigm come to blow back at the U.S. empire? This is the question Rainer Shea asks in one of his most recent articles.
Intuition tells us that what comes up must come down, that at a certain point, something needs to run into a wall, that there's material limitations to things, that there's a reaction to every action, and so on. And what to make of this when the U.S. empire has been doing everything it can, or doing so many things to try to defy this law of nature. It's unnatural what U.S. imperialism has been trying to do in these last 20 years since the War on Terror got going, and since Washington began perpetually expanding its global military operations. Obama bombed 2 more countries than Bush did, and he engaged in far more drone strikes and bombings than Bush did. And Trump continued this trend of accelerating imperialist violence by bombs and drone strikes at far more frequent rates even than Obama did. And so far, the Biden administration has been carrying out drone strikes in Somalia at far faster rates even than the Trump administration did. And Biden's team plans to engage in even more military buildup against Russia and China. So at which point is this going to come to a head? At which point is this going to result in some sort of blowback for U.S. imperialism? Well, to a certain extent, it already has, because the Biden administration, it's, as I've mentioned, it has to be more pragmatic and calculated than past U.S. presidents, U.S. administrations have been to act. It can no longer engage in Bush-style outright invasions of countries. It has to focus on local actors, proxy wars, paramilitaries, mercenaries, more concealable operations that are able to better be sustained, because there are material limitations on what the U.S. military can do, despite its perpetual expansions of its own budget. And of course, the vast majority of Americans deeply desire for the wars to end. So Biden has to spin some BS about how they're ending the endless wars. This is what happened in this last week or so, when the Biden administration withdrew troops from Somalia, while at the same time vastly accelerating the rate of drone strikes within Somalia. It's been kind of a how do you describe it, trade-off strategy, where they're trying to be calculated and strategic in their imperialism, but at the same time they're sticking to the overall trend of expanding military occupations in the areas surrounding Russia and China. And this goes along with a continuation of the trend towards military provocations against these superpowers, which could result in a world war that would break U.S. imperialism, if it doesn't result in a nuclear holocaust. So there's all these risk factors. There's all these destabilizing factors that the U.S. empire is inevitably moving towards, despite the technocratic, calculated nature of the new administration and how they try to approach U.S. militarism.
Yeah, wow. Well put. This is a wonderful article to end our discussion with. If this goes on, we'll end up with Skynet. Remember Skynet from the Terminator? Skynet takes over the world.
I have a vague idea of what it's like. It seems to tie into everything we've been seeing since 9/11 in terms of the expansion of the surveillance state, and in terms of the integration of big tech within this surveillance state.
Yeah.
in this last year with COVID-19 creating these openings for the tech industry to integrate its services into the infrastructure of the country. There's definitely an opening for an unprecedented mass surveillance state to be implemented, one that goes along with an unprecedented online censorship apparatus and propaganda apparatus. These will rely on algorithms.
Yeah,
already in recent years, we've seen the U.S. intelligence agencies collaborate with these big tech companies to censor anti-imperialist content, while aggressively pushing the New York Times, CNN, etc., onto the masses through these algorithms.
Yeah, and the full automation of war. That's what the drones are headed towards. the full automation of war, to the point where it could be done all with robots and computers. And that's what Skynet was in the Terminator series of movies. You should, if you've never done so, you should go and take a look at the Terminator, and you'll get my drift of what I'm going after. I don't think it'll ever get that far, because I believe that the American working class and the global working class, even more so, is waking up and is about to, it has already over the last, especially the last year, has been phenomenal. The last year and a half has been phenomenal in the sheer number of uprisings against neoliberalism, uprisings against the police state, uprisings against all of this the dystopia that the domination of finance capitalism has visited upon humanity. So, like I said, I don't think it'll get that far, but that's the logical outcome of the direction they're heading in now with this war paradigm that you are speaking of. The total automation of warfare, where you don't even need people. Fuck, you can withdraw all the American troops in Somalia. Don't need them. We can just bomb the fuck out of the poor, innocent black and brown people in Somalia. And nobody's the wiser, because, of course, the American billionaire-owned capitalist media, the mass media, that some people call it the mainstream media, MSM, which I detest that term, because there's absolutely nothing mainstream about this capitalist-owned media. But they are never going to report on what's going on in Somalia, like you have in this article, Rainer. So yeah, this when will the war paradigm come to blow back at the U.S. empire? As you say, it already is, but I think that's what we started this discussion with. Xi and Putin leading the world in making the case for a win-win versus zero-sum world order. In other words, a fair world order that is much, much better for the global working class, as opposed to the American hegemony that is on its way out today. It's kind of like Trump in his last few weeks, you know. Very, I'd say that's very very good analogy for what's happening to the capitalist imperialist system globally in general. So, yeah, good point. But I think what Presidents Putin and Xi are doing is laying the groundwork for the global South to erupt in a counter move against this kind of American brutality and belligerence that the American imperialist, American-led imperialist global order has been visiting on the rest of the world, most of the world, for decades and decades and decades. So yeah, I see it coming. I see it already starting. Hopefully, someday in the not too distant future, we will see the end of this disease, this cancer on humanity called capitalism and imperialism. So that's it with me. How about with you?
You said it.
Great. Okay, with that, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you, Rainer, as always, for your fine contributions. Until next week, I bid you sweet adieu.